Here comes the recording. All right. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, January 12th. And my name is Heather Kraus. I am a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. And We All Count is a project that is dedicated to embedding equity in data projects. And Talking Data Equity is one of my very favorite things that We All Count does. It happens most Fridays, not every single Friday, but most Fridays at noon, Toronto time. So that's the same time as New York City and DC, the eastern part of the United States. And it's an informal, casual, free drop in space where we talk about the practice of concrete ways to increase equity in your data projects. And what we do here on Fridays is different from Friday to Friday. Some Fridays we talk about a specific technique. Some Fridays we have an open Q&A time. Some Fridays we have special guests, and we have some great special guests coming up. I will say that next Friday, we have Tamara Noper, who is doing great work on race and surveillance and quantitative data. And what we're doing this Friday, today's Friday. What we're doing this Friday is I've put together a series of questions that regular participants have asked, and they're all about different ways to use public facing data sources to increase the equity in your data projects. So I thought we would kick off 2024 with a little bit more of a practical approach. We're going to really look at some specific ways to access publicly accessible data and use that data in ways that can increase the equity in your data projects. And like most Fridays, this is being recorded, and it's being recorded so that we can share it on our data equity forum, our public Discord, which I just put a link to the community in the chat. That is not a membership site. The We All Count public data equity forum is free. Anybody can access it. Anybody can go to that link and read through the posts and the resources. If you want to make a post or add a resource of your own, then you do need to set up an account. And what we need for an account is just an email and a password. That email is used for nothing other than to reset your password if you forget it. We don't use that email to send you any marketing. We don't use that email to track you across the web, and we certainly don't sell that email. So feel free to get involved if you're interested in that public facing data equity forum. And the events section of that forum is where you can find the recordings for most of the Fridays, and also associated resources and slides for the presenters who want to share their slides. So that is the place to go after today if you're interested in some of the resources. All right. So today, the logistics will be a little bit different today. Sometimes on Fridays, if we have a guest speaker, we ask you to kind of use the chat to have your conversations while the guest speaker shares slides and share stories. But since it's me today, and I'm going to show you some really practical steps about public data and equity, don't feel like you have to wait until an official question and answer period. If at any time you want to ask a question, use the chat to ask the questions or make a comment. And you can use the chat either with the blue drop-down menu set to everyone so that everybody who's here and everybody who watches the recording can see your question. Or if you feel more comfortable just asking me privately, just set that little blue drop-down menu to my name, Heather Kraus, and you can direct message me. And if you'd rather turn your mic on and ask your question out loud rather than using the chat, that's great too. You can do that at any time today. It's probably going to work best if you raise your hand, just because there's a lot of people here and we don't want a lot of people trying to talk at the same time. So if you raise your hand using the little Zoom reactions section, usually a little smiley face with a plus on the smiley face head. You can raise your hand in Zoom, and the Whale Count Tech team will unmute you and we can have a conversation. So today is a little bit different. I want you to feel free to hop in at any point. So I am going to share my screen, and I'm gonna share slides, but I'm only gonna share, I think I only have like 4 slides. So the slide part of today is gonna be very, very short. Welcome to Talking Data Equity. And excuse me, we had a number of questions. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to say. People who want to submit questions for future Talking Data Equities. I just put a link in the chat to the main Talking Data Equity page. And one thing on that main Talking Data Equity page is there's always an ongoing list of what's coming up and what our topics will be and which days we have no Talking Data Equity. You will notice that towards the end of January and the beginning of February, we have an unusual break from having Talking Data Equities. And that's because I am doing an on-site. I'm going to be traveling to a place where 2 of those Fridays I'm actually going to be on a plane. And one of those Fridays I'm going to be in a place where I don't think there's probably going to be good Wi-Fi. So we have an unusual break. Anyway, that's where you can find the schedule for Talking Data Equity. And that's also where you can submit your suggestions and requests. You can submit suggestions and requests on that page for future speakers. They can be people that you know or topics that you want to see discussed or books that you've loved. And you can also submit questions. And I think because people had a little bit of extra time over the last couple of weeks, we got a lot of questions. So we're going to really focus on making sure that we do Talking Data Equity sessions that answer the questions you've submitted. And we got 5 or 6 different questions about public data. What is it? How can we use it for equity? And we also got some specific suggestions. You know, what about this site? What about that site? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And essentially, public data is good for many, many, many reasons. And there are lots of interesting things you can do with public facing data. And I thought we could probably summarize it by looking at 5 different uses. This is not a comprehensive list of everything you can do, but I thought these 5 kind of themes covered a lot of the really important ways you can use public facing data for equity. It is very useful to build evidence and inform strategy. It is also very useful for providing context. It's great for changing where we put accountability. That's something that we talk a lot about in terms of equity, and I'm going to show you an example of that next or shortly. And it can change the bias. So you will notice that I didn't say it can remove the bias in a data project because you can't remove bias. People, of course, come to me a lot and say, can you help me find a data set that is unbiased? Or can you help me build a model that is unbiased? Or can you help me make sure that I'm asking a research question in a way that doesn't bias the answers? And the answer to all of those questions is always no, I can't help you with that because every single thing that we do with quantitative data has bias in it. It is always centering someone's lived experience. Quantitative data and data projects are always prioritizing somebody's preferences or somebody's set of values. It isn't possible to generate evidence that doesn't. So instead of trying to do something that we actually can't do, which is find something that's unbiased, what I recommend is that we work on noticing the bias and documenting the bias and doing our best to align the bias or align the choices that we're making with the purpose of the project that we're working on. And public data can be very useful for that. And I'm going to show you an example of that shortly. So that's why I didn't say remove bias, but change bias. Oh, okay, great question. Thank you for not waiting. I really want to emphasize today is a day where I don't need you in any way to wait. What do we mean by public data? That's a great question. Um, so I don't really think that we need to get a restrictive definition that everybody agrees on. But essentially, the questions that though many of you submitted and how I'm thinking of public data is data that you can access um, without a lot of barriers. In other words, data that you can access with a limited amount of credentials or pre-registration and things like that. So great question. So I don't always mean data about the general public. So it's not really about my definition that I'm working with for today is the public doesn't describe the content of the data, but describes the accessibility of the data. Great question. Thank you for asking that question. Really appreciate it. One thing that I am going to say is that what I'm going to walk through today are kind of internal examples. So nothing I'm going to show you today is like publication ready. It's more like a behind the scenes. This is what it looks like when I'm trying to use public data and trying to do a little bit of exploratory analysis. And one of the steps I'm going to leave out, because we've talked about it a number of times already in talking data equity, is the building of a data biography. So anytime that you are going to use data that you did not collect, it's really important that you spend at least a small amount of time, preferably more than a small amount of time, understanding what choices went into the generation of that data and the who, what, where, when, and why of that data. And WeAllCount does have a tool for doing that. And that tool is called Data Biographies. And you can find examples of a data biography template as well as completed data biographies, although the data biography template, I will note, has not been updated yet with the suggestion from Leslie Wright that we very happily received a couple of weeks ago, and that is still in process. However, if you go to the WeAllCount community forum and type data biography into the search, you will be able to see a couple of examples of data biographies. So I'm not going to talk more about data biographies today because we did a whole couple actually of talking data equities previously, and you can watch those. But I just wanted to mention that if I was using publicly accessible data, the first thing I would do before I did anything with that data is that I would spend some time understanding how that data set was created, what went into that data set. I'm not going to demonstrate that to you now, so we're going to assume that that's already been done. Okay. All right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of examples. All right, great. Of what I mean by the type of data that I would look for and the type of data that you folks were asking questions about. So one of the questions that we received was about a very interesting research hub called the All of Us Research Hub. So this is something that is established by the National Institutes of Health. I'm going to give you a link to that. So this is the page that I'm on right now. And this doesn't completely fall under the description of like a publicly accessible data source. Some of the data here is publicly accessible, but what this is really designed to be is actually kind of a research hub that shares very, very specific and unique data with people who are registered and approved for researcher workbench access. So they're on this All of Us research hub put together by the NIH, which is in the United States called the National Institute of Health. It's kind of two-tiered. So there is data here. If you go to data tools and go to data browser, there is data here that is publicly accessible. And by and large, from my exploration of it, it looks like the data that is publicly accessible is aggregated at a national level. So for instance, I thought the social determinants of health section might be useful for people who work on data equity. If you click on that link that says social determinants of health, which is kind of, this type of thing I do when I'm starting to look for data that might be useful to my project. I just click around a lot. And what they've done is they've gathered up a lot of responses to a specific survey. You can download the survey here, and you can click here to see answers to questions that are part of that social determinants of health survey. So my neighborhood is noisy. I thought that was an interesting question because that's an important contextual variable to think about if you're trying to understand somebody's experience of their neighborhood or of life. And you can see that they're giving you a really quick summary of aggregate answers. So this it looks like a 4-point scale from strongly disagree to agree to strongly agree. This is a code in case you're looking through the code book and you want to find this question and answer. This is the number of people who answered that, people who said strongly disagree to the statement, my neighborhood is noisy. This is the number of people that said disagree. This is the number of people that said agree. This is the number of people that said strongly agree. These are the percentages or shares. You can also download a little bit of the data or look at it as a chart. So of course, this is where I, again, want to emphasize that before I would use this data, before I would take this summary aggregate data about whether or not people think their neighborhood is noisy, I would definitely need to look into the data biography. Who was included in this? Where were they from? Exactly. This represents what area. It doesn't tell you from this. And so you're going to need to dig down into exactly the who, what, where, when, and why of this data. Okay. But I just wanted to show you what data is available. We're not going to actually work anymore with this data, but somebody did specifically ask about this. And what geography is covered varies a lot. So you would need to dig into the metadata and build yourself a little data biography. Now, what's the second tier of this research hub, I can't demonstrate to you at all because it's the researcher workbench. And that's why this really exists. There is a lot of very, very nuanced individual level health data that looks like it's very interesting when I just kind of read the description, but you have to register and be approved for access. And in order to be approved for access, you need, I'm not exactly sure what all the details are, but you need to be a formal researcher at what looks like is an academic institute in the United States, which of course I am not. So I can't show you the workbench. It looks really, really cool though. So if you are associated with an academic institution in the US and you're interested, you could probably register for that. All right. So the next couple things I'm going to show you are other things that people asked about. First of all, though, I'm going to share, you can still see my screen, hopefully, yes. I'm going to share a little doc that I'm going to make accessible to all of you, which this doc has links to all the different data sets that I'm going to show you today. Okay, so you can use those and you can also add those. I've given you all access to the editing function of that doc. So if you're interested in adding your suggestions, we could get a little crowdsourced doc of publicly available data. So the next thing I'm going to show you is a source of extremely useful data. This is part of a project called County Health Rankings and Roadmaps. And this you can, I'm going to just really quickly go to the About Us. You can really dig into this, but it's part of the University of Wisconsin Population Health Institute. And it's a program that's been going on for a really long time. It's supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And basically, they do a great job of collecting data, cleaning it, aggregating it. They use it to rank different counties according to various health dimensions. But you can also dig down and get really specific variables that might be useful for you to answer questions that are happening in your data project. So I'm going to show you in a minute or two a project that we were working on where we wanted some publicly available data about the burden of renting or owning a home in various parts of the United States. And we were able to come directly to the County Health Rankings and Roadmap site and learn about it, read all of the background about what this data is and where they got it, and then download the data and use it in our data project. And I'm going to show you how we used it in 1 or 2 minutes. Before I do that, I'm going to show you 2 more data sources, and then I'm going to show you my examples. The third data source that you folks asked about in the questions that you want to talk about during talking data equity, is how might we use the civil rights data collection that is collected and published by the U.S. Department of Education. So again, the link to that is on the doc that I shared with you, but if you want it in the chat, in case you're on your phone or something, there you go. This is the page I'm looking at. And the civil rights data collection is mind-blowingly cool. If you are interested in any kind of data having to do with what the teacher profiles are like in US public schools, what the student population distribution of various demographics is like. If you're interested in what various math achievements and reading achievements and literacy achievements are like in US schools, if you're interested in things like discipline, suspension, expulsions, times when the criminal justice system gets involved, this is an amazing, amazing resource. And I'm going to show you a little bit of how we might use this if we had it. But the fact that this is collected and made publicly available in the United States blows my mind. It is such useful information if you want to add some context to a data project that has anything to do with public education in the US. And it starts at preschool. They have details about discipline at the preschool level. It's so cool. And then right up through grade 12. So this is not a post-secondary data set. This is grade 12. But they have really, really useful, great metadata. You can read code books. You can read how the data was collected. And then you can download the data. You don't have to be a university researcher. Just can download the data. Okay. Lots of you already know about this. This is another amazing source of publicly accessible data that is kind of maintained by PolicyLink. Again, you can go to the About, learn who's collecting and curating this data, what they're collecting and curating, why they're collecting it. And then, of course, you can always talk to these people. The Racial Equity Index is very statistically advanced. They collect data. Again, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is at the county level. The The parts that aren't at the county level are usually at the state level, or sometimes at a political, like, I can never remember what you call them in Canada, but I mean, in the States. You can see it's at the state, region, city, county level, and it's sometimes, I think you might call them wards. Sometimes some of the data is at the wards or political district. Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I can never remember the name of the political geography in the United States. So they, much like the county health rankings people, and the National Equity Atlas people both spend tons of time and resources and money gathering data from all across the US, from different surveys, from different public and proprietary places. Then they clean it, they organize it, and they do a bunch of advanced kind of multivariate statistics to get it into a single number or two or three kind of metrics that measure different types of equity. So first of all, that's amazingly cool. And they make that downloadable and available to you. And in addition to that, they make the detailed data behind their index data also available to you. So you can go to the data in action section, the labs section, and the indicators section, and you can download this data. And I'm about to show you an example of that. The last one is the one we've talked about a lot already in Talking Data Equity. So I'm only going to briefly mention it. You know, this is one of my favorite data sets, the contextual determinants of health. Again, with just a small lightweight registration, you can access the detailed data that somebody else has spent a lot of time organizing, collecting, cleaning, putting into spreadsheets by county. And this is largely, but not exclusively, about measures of equity having to do with race and gender and sexual and gender minority status and politics. And again, you can download this information, and there's all kinds of very, very detailed descriptions. So this is just the description here is like a high level description, but you can dig down in and they'll give you really, really specific a description of what it is they're calculating and how they're calculating it and who made those decisions. Rachel Hardiman at I don't remember what the university's name is, but I know it's in Minneapolis. So maybe it's the University of Minnesota. Actually, I think it is the University of Minnesota Department of or Institute of Population Health. Amazing equity work. It is UNM. Thank you. This is amazing work. And Rachel has been part of the spearhead of getting this data made accessible to people like you and me who aren't, always employed at big, fancy academic institutions. All right. So now that I've given you a very brief glance into what types of data I'm talking about, and again, I really want to emphasize that before we would use any of this data, we would spend time reading the background information, figuring out what exactly this data is measuring, not relying on things like variable names to think that we know what's in the data, because I can tell you from very, very painful personal experience that variable names hardly ever tell you what is actually in a data set. After we've done that, then we can start using the data to add equity to our projects. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about 5 broad reasons that you might want to do this. And the first is if you don't have data of your own, or you have qualitative data and you need some quantitative data to maybe fulfill funders' desires or make a case to somebody who really wants quantitative data. You can use any of these data sets or lots of other similarly available data sets to kind of build an equity-based strategy, and form the deployment of resources, apply to a grant. And what I'm going to show you is one way to do that. Great, this is working. This is using data as well as a Tableau tool from the National Equity Atlas. And again, that's from PolicyLink. The link is in the chat as well as on that doc. And I'm going to show you what this data looks like in Tableau today. Tableau is, I didn't actually bring a link to Tableau, but if you just Google Tableau, you will find a link. Tableau is a data visualization software that is pretty easy to use for beginners. And it was recently purchased by Salesforce. So I'm not 100% sure that this is still the case, but I'm fairly certain that if you work for a nonprofit or you work for a small social service organization, you can get licenses to use Tableau for either no money at all or for a very, very reduced amount of money. They sell this Tableau software to like really, really big companies like FedEx and UPS, and big companies use Tableau and pay a lot of money to use Tableau. And they take some of that money and use it to give either free or reduced cost licenses to nonprofits and small social sector organizations. And yes, that's right. So there's a lot of different levels of Tableau. There's something called Tableau Public, which you can use online as long as you're willing to make your data publicly accessible. And then there's like downloadable Tableau Desktop, which you can put on your desktop or your laptop. You can just buy a license for that or apply for a free license. I think it can be free if you are a journalist, work for a nonprofit, and then I think it's greatly reduced if you work for a government or an educational institution. Yeah, and lots of students too. So they really do try and get this out to people. So that's why I thought I would show you this because I think you can probably get Tableau if you're interested. But what I'm showing you is doesn't have to be done in Tableau. I thought it would just be easiest for today. So what I'm showing you here is data from that racial equity index spreadsheet that talks about housing burden. So housing burden is essentially the count or percent of households that are paying more than 30% of their income to find appropriate housing. And there's lots and lots of complicated definitions of what is and what is not appropriate housing. And you can read all about that in the metadata. But the reason that we would use something like this publicly accessible data is because it saves us from having to collect our own data. And we can make a case for where we may, for example, want to, which counties we might want to start with in terms of putting in place a new food security project. So we can use the data that they've shown us to make a map. This is a map of the counties of the United States. We can't see Alaska here, which I know there's people from Alaska here. So let me make it bigger so that we can see Alaska. There we go. And so you can see that this is using public data. So accessing this data and collecting this data didn't cost us any money. We were able to download this from that racial equity index site and make a map that shows for various years, for various counties, where people are either burdened, which is 30% of their income, severely burdened, which is 50% of their income. And we can also compare renters to owners. And then, of course, you can do a lot of the regular stuff where you can, if you want to zoom in to a very specific, if you're interested, maybe only, and you're not interested in all of the United States, maybe I usually use this on my laptop and I'm on my desktop. And you're interested only in a part of the United States, you can zoom in to different sections. All right, there we go. Now we got the hang of it. So let's say you're only interested in the state of Pennsylvania, which is one of the few American states that I know a lot about because that's where I grew up. Dauphin County, where I grew up, 7% of the household owners are severely burdened. So that is an example. This is certainly not a complete example of everything that you might do, but I wanted to show you, even if you're not going to combine publicly accessible data with your data, this is the kind of thing that you can do with publicly accessible data that might be able to add some equity to a grant application, add some equity to some qualitative data. What I'm showing you now is a bar chart. This is the very same data. This is the housing burden data from the Racial Equity Index. And this time it's broken out by race and ethnicity. And yes, for sure, you would need to figure out exactly how race and ethnicity was assigned to different individuals in different households. And that's always complicated and never perfect. And then decide if that aligns with what you're trying to do. So this is a quick example of just downloading a bit of publicly accessible data and asking some equity questions of that data in such a way that you can make some strategies, develop some evidence without having to have data collection and analysis skills or resources or time as part of your project, because I know not all of you do. All right. Great. Okay, now I want to show you what can happen when you have some data of your own and you want to be able to add some context and maybe some accountability to that data. So this comes from a data set where we were collecting data from young people about their sense of belonging. So the data I'm showing you right here is data that is proprietary. So this is not public data. And essentially we're looking at this access is, oh dear, it lost connection to Tableau. I hope that doesn't stay. So we're looking at student sense of belonging. And I'm not going to go into a big talk about why we're measuring sense of belonging, but sense of belonging does seem to be an important indicator about how school climate and school culture is going, better than grades or retention, things like that. It's an early indicator of how well it's going. And we're partnering with a group of people who are implementing mentorship programs in schools. And they're trying to assign mentors that have a similar racial and ethnic background to the students that they're being matched with. There's a lot of theory about why this might be important and why this might be helpful. And I'm showing you a little bit of data from this project. So this line here is the sense of belonging for the students that did not get matched with a mentor. And this line here is the sense of belonging for the students that did get matched with a mentor. It's called in the program or not in the program. All right. So that's the basic data that I have. And one of the things that we wanted to think about was, do we think that this program is working? And then the equity questions, like, who do we think this program is working for? And what are some of the contextual influences about whether or not this program is working? So one of the things you can use public data to do is to add context, which is very, very important for equity. So the next thing I'm going to show you, hopefully, if the internet is still working. Maybe not. Let's see if I can show you the next steps. Oh, good, I can. The next steps that we wanted to show you were beginning to answer the question, did this program work for students from different racial and ethnic backgrounds? And absolutely, I want to address, Chris, what you're saying in the chat, which is displaying data like this, do we really want to display averages? And the answer is no. That what I'm showing you today is very much just an inner exploration that I'm doing in the early days of thinking about what public data might be able to add equity to my data project. Nothing I'm showing you today is ready for public consumption. Nothing I'm showing you today is anything that I would share beyond some just like quick and exploratory data viz that I'm doing for my own understanding. Because absolutely, the things that Eli Holder taught us are there are much better ways to display this, but those ways take much longer to create. And I wanted to just show you, what does it really look like when I'm just sitting down in the early days of a data project and doing some, quick off the cuff exploration with the data that I've collected and public data that I'm considering. And I really appreciate that you raised this question. So I want to know, okay, what does it look like for this program and students of different backgrounds? And you can see right away, if I break it out by race of students, it looks really different. We have a lot more information. Again, this light blue, this first bar for everybody is students that are not in the program. And the dark bar is students that are in the program. And this, looking at the data this way, gives us just a quick snapshot of what the difference is like for students of different races. This is the very same data displayed in a way that I find easier to read. Some people find it much harder to read. The light dot is no program. The dark dot is the program. And it helps us see for different races of students, do we think that this program is making a difference? So that's like just a standard kind of quick exploration that we might do with data that we have. But what I want to show you today is why you might want to add some public data to this. And why I would want to add some public data to this is that this is a question about did matching a student with a mentor that has a similar racial and ethnic background as they do, did it change their sense of belonging? And from an equity perspective, just the student and the mentor is not going to be enough to think about, because the student and the mentor exist in a context. They exist in a system of social and racial structures and systems and power dynamics that probably need to be taken into account if we're going to draw conclusions from this data. So adding context is one of the main reasons that I like to bring public data in. So we connected from the contextual determinants of health data sets, we connected with our proprietary data, some segregation data. And so what you're looking at now is we're still looking at the same students and the same bars that show whether or not they what their sense of belonging is without the program and with the program. But we have 3 different columns for each racial identity of students, for each administrative category. Students that are going to schools in low segregation areas, students that are going to schools in medium segregation areas, and students that are going to school in high segregation areas. So this is publicly available data that can provide context to the proprietary data that we're trying to understand. And I'm going to switch it to circles only because that's the way I can process this. It doesn't mean it's the best way, it just means it's the way that my brain works. You can arrange it however you want to work for your brain. But you can see now that we can answer the question in a slightly different way. So again, the darker dot here that I've labeled program is the sense of belonging for white students who did have a mentor. And then the no program, the lighter color circle, is sense of belonging for students who were not matched with a mentor. And so this gap is the beginnings of an understanding of the difference that the program may have made. This is, of course, not the only analysis we'd want to do. This is an exploratory analysis, but I wanted to do something that was simple enough that I could show you how to integrate public data into this. So look how different it is, though, for students that are white, that are in high segregation areas, medium segregation areas, and low segregation areas. And one of the things that's really, really interesting for me personally, the thing that might be interesting to you is different, is that when I look at these dots and I say, did this program work for Black students? These two dots are awfully close together compared to all of these other dots, right? So the change for Black students was smallest than for any other administrative category of students. But when we add this public data, when we add the context about whether the students were in low segregation areas, medium segregation areas, or high segregation areas, we can see that for students that were in high segregation areas, it actually made quite a bit of difference. And we wouldn't have been able to see that only from our proprietary data. Great question is being asked in the chat. Does it matter that the IPUMS data is not the same population of students? And the answer is not in this case. So the contextual determinants of health are telling me, I'm trying to think how to explain this. The segregation data that I downloaded is telling me for specific geographic areas, so for specific counties, whether the segregation in that county or where that school lives, whether that school is in a low segregation area, a medium segregation area, or a high segregation area. And so as long as there's anything that I can link it with, so in this case, our proprietary data, we knew what schools we collected the proprietary data from. And so we're able to link it to the zip codes or the counties that come in the contextual determinants of health data. So it's okay that the contextual determinants of health data, that IPUMS data, isn't data about the exact same students, because we're not saying that it is. We're saying that it's data about the neighborhoods or the context that those students are living in. Yeah, that's a really, really important question, because that's one of the reasons people think that they can't combine public data with their proprietary data, because it's not the exact same group of students and it would somehow bias something. And if you use it like this, it doesn't. If you are saying this is the context that that student lives in. And yes, a couple of people are asking like really specific impact analysis style questions, and absolutely. If you really want to claim that this program had scientific impact, you're going to have to do more than just make a couple of charts in Tableau. But I'm just showing you how to get started. And if you just want to do some descriptive analysis and kind of know what types of models you might build, this is by no means the end of a for sure definitive causal analysis. Agreed. For sure. I really want to clarify that. Okay, I'm going to show you one more, because the other thing that adding this publicly accessible and more population level or contextual data can do is it can help you change the bias and change where we're looking for the onus to change or where we're placing accountability. So this is another piece of proprietary data that we have about how different types of students are doing. Black students, Hispanic students, white students. And again, we would absolutely need to explain clearly in a non-technical way how students were classified into those. But what I'm trying to show you here is after we've done that, how we might want to add some public data, because right now, if we only show data about students, it's very easy to direct readers or direct consumers of this data project to think that there is an important characteristic difference in students who are from different races. If we keep data and data analysis at the level of individuals, we often then assume that the accountability or the responsibility is at the level of an individual. And so we create a bias, which is a very culturally acceptable bias towards this idea that, it's up to an individual. And different types of students, whether it's race or disability or gender, are going to achieve different things because of individual differences. But let's look at what happens when we add some public data. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because you will get the point. So the first thing that I want to look at is this is where I went and got the publicly accessible data from the civil rights data and also some data from the county health rankings. So we got publicly accessible data from two different sources. Some of the data we got was about the adequacy of school funding. And we just wanted to ask, and again, this is an exploratory question. This is not a causal question. Is there a relationship between the performance of Black students on these math tests and the funding, the adequacy of the funding of their schools? Not really. However, is there a relationship between segregation and the performance of Black students in schools? Yes, there is. The more highly segregated the school is, or the schools in the county are, the worse the Black students are doing on this math test. Again, that is not a causal question. This is not a chart I would share with the public. I'm just sharing this with you so you can see what kind of process I would go through when I'm trying to decide how I'm going to build this data story, build this data project. Now I want to look at the comparison of the gap between the average math performance of a Black student and the average math performance of a white student. Again, if you know me and you've been coming to Talking Data Equity, you know that I'm not probably going to make public a bunch of things that compare a Black student to a white student performance. But I need to start thinking it through and looking at what might be related to these differences so that I can focus in on that, the root cause. One of the things that might be related is the school funding. So I made these dots, different sizes based on how well funded the school is. That didn't seem too useful. Then I wanted to start looking at segregation, because a lot of the relationships were seeming like segregation was an issue. And you can see I've now color coded these circles, the purple circles, the darker purple a circle is, the less segregated that school is. And the darker kind of gold a school is, the more segregated. And you can see that this part of the graph is much more purple than this part of the graph. And that means that there's a much bigger gap between the performance of white students and the performance of Black students in schools that are highly segregated. So again, this is not a causal analysis. I would not share this publicly, but it's starting to help me understand. It's starting to help me move the accountability off of individual students over to what might be causing this. So now I want to look at the difference Now I make a variable where I actually do look at the difference, the actual gap between average performance of a white student and average performance of a Black student, because I want to start looking exploratorily for some root causes. This is what it looks like for states. I know if some people think this chart is great and really informative, some people think this chart is horrible and they never want to see it again. But I'm just saying that's what it looks like. Last thing I want to show you, because I know we have time for like 3 more slides. Then I just start looking at the difference between the white student and the Black student performance in relation to publicly available data like segregation. Again, segregation is highly related. School funding, highly related. Spending per pupil, highly related to these gaps. Spending per pupil and segregation at the same time. And all I'm doing is showing you that I'm using this publicly accessible data to combine with the proprietary student achievement data I have to kind of shift accountability. It's not because the Black kids aren't doing less well on these math scores because there's something inherent about race that affects math scores. It's because there's a context where the schools are segregated, the schools aren't properly funded, and the amount of money being spent per pupil is all influencing a change in math score for Black students. And without that publicly accessible contextual data, I'm going to have a hard time showing that. And then I can do stuff like make maps if I want to understand stuff like, is this a policy issue? Is this a political issue? I'm not really going to go into that, but you get the idea. All right. So it's 1 o'clock. I want to make sure that we end on time. And we did actually get through the 3 examples that I brought to share. And the bottom line is that if you have no data, or if you have some data for your project, but you want to add context, you want to shift accountability away from individuals to policy and context, and you want to change the bias that might be present in the data that you have, it's really useful to look for publicly accessible data, link it with the data that you have, and use it in a variety of ways in your project. And the Google Doc that I shared with you, I'm going to keep that up as long as we don't get any trolls in it. And I'll add all of this to our forum so that you can go back and watch it, or you can access it and play around. And if you have, a lot of people are asking me for recommendations of public data sets. I don't have time to make any right now, but if you have recommendations or requests for public data sets, you can go ahead and put them into the shared Google Doc, and we will crowdsource ideas. Because if there's one thing I know about the Talking Data Equity community, you have great ideas and resources. Okay. Great to see you again. Happy New Year. And we will be back next Friday to talk about race, surveillance, and data. Okay. It was great to see you all, and I'll see you next Friday. Bye, everybody.